Welcome to the Truth About Employed Physicians podcast, a weekly show where we take you behind the scenes of the professional healthcare industry and reveal the little-known methods highly successful physicians, doctors, and professionals are executing right now to maximize their income, reduce their financial liabilities, and most importantly, regain the freedom to live their lives on their terms. Subscribe to the Truth About Employed Physicians podcast today so you don't miss a single episode of this highly valuable information from our host, a veteran physician with more than 20 years in practice and counting. Now, your host, Dr. Incorporated.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Incorporated, bringing you the next session about the truth about employed physicians. I'm with my son John today, and we're going to pick up our conversations that we've been having about young physicians and the physician life, all part of a book that will be coming out soon, talking more about this subject. Today, John, we're going to be talking about the corporate life. And when I say the corporate life, what I'm really referring to is the sense that when most modern physicians go to work, a lot of them are working as employees of a corporation. And I have been an employee of a corporation now for well over 20 years. And there's certain nuances associated with that as opposed to being in private practice. Now, for you, since you're a medical student, you're going to kind of look at it in the context of living under the rules and regulations of the big medical school that you go to. But there's some parallels that go on with that. And for those of you in my audience who work as physicians, as employees, you'll understand exactly the content of some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Let me start by saying it's been a long winter. A lot of us are fighting COVID and fighting for our patients with COVID. I'm thankful that I was able to get vaccinated. And John, did you get vaccinated yet?
Yep.
All right. That's a good thing as well. And that's a good feeling to know that we're partially protected or fully protected from the virus and really can do our part in bringing about herd immunity in our nation and around the world. And so that's a real positive. But thank you for all of you who are interfacing with this pandemic and doing the work that you do every day as a physician. It's really important. And I know many of you have probably saved lives today as part of the work you've done. Thank you for that work. And so, John, I want to start our session today by kind of asking you, growing up in our home, did you have any awareness that I was employed by a company, or did you just think I was just a doctor doing his thing?
I think I just thought you were just a doctor doing his thing.
Yeah.
Because my idea of what a doctor did was based on how you did things.
Yeah. So
it's just normal. That was like the option. That's what everyone did in my mind.
Yeah, and in our community, pretty much that's the way most doctors operated, right? Everybody sort of worked for an employer of some type, right? Mm-hmm. Including most of my friends who run our same physician network who work for those employers. So probably look pretty seamless to you and your friends, right?
Plus, in a smaller community, there's just not as much variety of ways that you can practice a lot of times.
Yeah.
You know, like here, the community is pretty dominated by one hospital, so
so for our listeners, just so you know the context, I live in a rural community in the Midwest, and I'm employed by a healthcare corporation, a hospital who owns our little local hospital. I'm part of their physician network, and pretty much we control, I would say, roughly 85-90% of the market share of our community. So for a lot of people who see me and see other physicians in the community and go to our hospital, that's all kind of one and the same to them. They don't really see it as much different. And most of the doctors in our community are frankly employed. And so I think some of you may be in different clinical circumstances or in different communities where that may not be quite as obvious. But I've enjoyed working for an employer. It's been a good experience for me, and my employer is a good employer, I feel like. And so I'm thankful for that. But since you were kind of unaware of it, though, did you ever note me as we were growing up, any tensions that you felt from me, any of the changes that happened with corporations, changes that happened with doctors, or pretty much were you oblivious to it because you were a young person and frankly it didn't really matter to you?
I feel like the biggest change that I probably picked up on, especially when I was younger, was the changing between different EMRs and the integration of EMR you'd have to learn one and then learn another one 2 years later and another one 4 years after that, and like different variations that took a lot of time. And
it took time away from home for me, right?
Yeah, and then the EMRs became more and more robust, where you had to do more and more things in them, and so that's a big trade-off in time of like, and a big part of medicine now is like, how do you manage the EMR documentation that is required, or that has become required by the different corporations or the different healthcare entities that exist.
Do you remember me doing my working on the computer, doing charts at home when I was home? Yeah. You
Definitely.
saw me do that quite a bit, probably, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I tell you, that's the elephant in the room for doctors, especially employed doctors today, is that EMR thing. And whether you're an employed doctor or not, you have to interface with EMRs. But I feel like for EMRs, the work that's required of doctors is, I think, a bit more for those of us who are employed. And the reason I say that is because it's all about data management for third parties. From my standpoint, an EMR has some advantages clinically. I mean, it's nice to be able to e-scribe something that we know that the prescription is going to get routed pretty quickly and safely and appropriately, as an example. I love being able to electronically pull up pictures or images of films that I've ordered, or consultations from my specialist friends who've seen my patients. But on the same token, the micro of that is that I'm having to populate in this chart a whole bunch of data that takes a long time to do, and most of that is really not for my benefit. Most of that's for the benefit of some third-party person.
For the patient's benefit.
Or sometimes for the patient's benefit, but mostly it's for the third parties and our employer, because in essence, they want to make me prove that I'm doing the work that I've told them that I'm doing. Kind of a sad truth that exists today is that, for physicians, we almost have to prove what we've done is good and right and appropriate, as opposed to saying that it is okay. And so that's all about that EMR mining and so forth. But you're exactly right. Over the years, from when I started in practice until even now, the encroachment of that EMR into my life, not just in the office, but into the home, has become a big thing. Yep. As a medical student, does that affect you at all?
I feel like not in the same way. Things are set up differently, so it's just more your studying that you have to do and your assignments that you have to do at home.
But as you're following physicians around or doing work in the hospital, you have to interface with the EMR.
Yeah, which, fortunately, most of what we do with the EMR is going to be at the hospital.
Yeah.
We're at least at our school, we're not really given access at home, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, probably
for our benefit.
That is to your benefit, okay? But that bell will turn, and it'll start to ring when you get into residency and then into practice. That'll change.
Yeah.
I know for me, it was probably between 10 to 15 years ago, because of that EMR and because of some of the responsibilities and extra stuff that comes with being a corporately employed physician, my patient panel had grown quite large. I was working hard. I was doing a lot of both inpatient and outpatient medicine. I was bringing work home through the EMR. And frankly, I was on the path to burnout. It was a big deal to me, and how it was starting to affect me. And I made some big practice changes, and we talk about that and some of the things that we do here in this podcast and the book that I have coming out as well about those changes. But one of the big changes I made was I moved to what's called the team care model, which is kind of like having a scribe nurse in the room to help me with my EMR documentation. And man, that was a game changer for me. When I began doing that, I didn't have to bring all my work home. I could get it all done while I was at the clinic during the day, and I could kind of separate myself, work and home, a little bit more easily. And that was a massive change for me that really, really sort of saved me from burnout. But this is such a common theme for physicians, this burnout idea, the EMR kind of being a burden and a challenge. And so, a lot of the corporations have developed wellness programs, to make sure that we're staying well and healthy and trying to do as well as we can with all the challenges and burdens that we have. In medical school, are they doing much of that?
Yeah, there's definitely a big push towards trying to address wellness within medical school. I would assume for the goal of trying to head off problems on the road as you become an actual attending physician. Some of the problems that attendings and residents deal with right now, they're trying to address them earlier, but the programs are well-intentioned but not necessarily always effective.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a disconnect between what administration thinks that wellness means to us and what we know wellness means to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in the corporate world, we deal with a similar sort of notion. I'm grateful that a lot of our employers, including mine, have really become more mindful of physician wellness and the need to take care of us and to prevent burnout, quite frankly, because it's almost at a crisis level in terms of the physician burnout issue in this country. And so these corporate plans get developed and we kind of laugh between physicians in that the plans that the corporations often have for us are a little bit slighted towards their angle of what they think the problem is, like maybe we need to do more mindfulness, we need to do yoga, we need a little more time management, we need to do other things that sort of make us feel better about who we are and all the burden that we have from this EMR. And at the end of the day, from my perspective, it's not about making me feel better about all the junk they throw at me. It's about doing something to change all the junk they throw at me so that I can feel better. Yeah. And there's a big difference that exists there. But from your standpoint, medical students sort of feel the same thing in terms of what these medical schools are doing for them.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the epitome of medical school administration disconnect with wellness is wellness lectures, because medical students already have enough lectures that they have to go through. We don't want to see 100 slides on wellness and how to be well. We'd rather spend those 3 hours doing something that makes us feel well, like go work out, sleep in, do something that you like to do, go hang out with friends, not have another lecture about something that you mostly already know, you just don't have time to apply it to your life. At least for medical students, it's really just give us, build in more time, build in like a half day off, or build in things like that for us to do what because we know how to take, just for most people, they know how to take care of themselves better than, and what they themselves need better than anyone else.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so for I guess corporations and people higher up to just try to throw a wet blanket over everything to try to solve the problem, it's not individualized enough and it doesn't work. No. And so it might work for a couple of people, but the majority really doesn't work for.
Yeah. I think the core issue that comes into play, especially for employed physicians, is the idea of autonomy. And so, when you choose to be employed by somebody, you're choosing to you're subjugating yourself to somebody else's control or authority over you. Mm-hmm. And although the corporation doesn't control your life outside of medicine, in some regards they kind of do, because your professional responsibilities can trickle into your home life, just like we talked about with me doing charts at home. Definitely. That, in the world of digital access, it feels like for a lot of physicians, they never get away from medicine because they're always sort of accessible, and it's hard to turn that off, especially in primary care, especially in a rural setting like I'm in. That can be quite challenging. And but I know that the thing that makes us feel sort of burnt out is that loss of autonomy, that sense of loss of control, the sense of me being able to do what I want professionally or personally without having any restrictions around it. And it's really the two sides of the coin. Like, I'm thankful I'm employed. There's a lot of elements of employment that are really wonderful, and a lot of the burdens of practice management that have been relieved of me. But the flip side of that is the loss of my autonomy or control over my professional life. Mm-hmm. And it really is the tension of the two that sort of have to be managed. And I think that's one of the secrets to really being well as a physician is if the corporations could see that just giving us a little bit more autonomy professionally or personally, they, I think, would see the positive benefits of it. And I think you referred to that, rather than having to go to a lecture about burnout, just give you the autonomy and freedom to do something that individually will feed that part of your soul, as opposed to telling you what you should or shouldn't do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes a big difference, but it's an important topic. And, it's such an important topic for you as a medical student heading into medicine and a career in medicine. But even for me at the tail end of my career, we really have to be mindful of not getting sucked into that place where we can easily get burned out by working too much or really having somebody control us.
Yeah, and I feel like definitely don't want to underappreciate the new emphasis on wellness that never existed in the past. I think it's really important, but hard to teach an old dog new tricks. Med schools know how to give lectures, corporations know how to give mandates.
Yep.
And so,
or develop programs.
Exactly. That's how they know how to do. Sometimes that it's hard for them to understand that less is more, or sometimes doing nothing is doing, or allowing the room or space for having space. Is all that's needed, instead of another task force on something,
Yep, another meeting, another thing to take
committee.
Time away from. And at the end of the day, our sense of well-being, it really comes back to an equation that involves time. When we have time, that is time that we get to control, some autonomous time that we get to have. It kind of goes back to having some balance in our life. That's a huge, huge element. But corporations always want a little bit more and a little bit more of you. I mean, that's by nature. They're paying us big bucks to be employees, and they want to get every bit and every ounce of their benefit out of what they're paying us in the equation, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of a give and take relationship that exists there. But boy, in my estimation, like you said, 30 years ago, were there corporate wellness programs? No. Were there even physician wellness programs? No, not a lot. And why is that? Because the burnout crisis hadn't hit. And I think this parallels physician employment. The more physician employment we've gotten, the more physician burnout we've gotten. And I think they do run side by side by side. It's not a coincidence that as one has risen, the other has risen. And I'm not casting blame on any specific corporation, but it's the nature that doctors like to be independent decision makers and have as much control and autonomy as they can, and they're willing to be team players. I'm very willing to be a team player, and I'm really willing to be a good corporate citizen as well, but I need supported by my corporation to make sure that I'm in a place of balance and in particular equipped with what is needed to not let the EMR become too onerous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really an important subject, and one that you're going to be entering into at some point, because over 90% of graduating residents are going into being employed doctors. I know that pattern is going to probably continue even as you finish up residency and what we think will be orthopedic surgery in a few years. And so as we kind of wrap up today's session, I want to encourage you as physicians to think about what you're doing to prevent burnout as employees of healthcare corporations. And if you have suggestions on things that you found personally that have been good for you to prevent burnout, or if you're a student or a resident and things that you're doing that make a difference to prevent burnout, I would encourage you to share those with us online. I think as a collaborative physician community, it's important for us to support each other in these processes. I don't want us to depend on our corporations to provide those things. Again, they have a certain bias and a certain approach that they take to this that is different than what we would take as physicians. And so it's too important for us to let this be given over to our employers, so to speak. And we need to manage it ourselves as well as we can. And so look forward to hearing from you and get your feedback on this, and hope you have a great week the rest of your week. Thanks.